Hello, bookworms. Welcome to the Bonified Bookworm. I'm your host, Rachel, and if you're watching this channel, it's so that you can read along with me and improve your English or learn English. I keep going back and forth. I guess you have to be pretty advanced to read along. So anyway, I hope that you enjoy reading along with me, and I wanted to give a book review, which I've realized I'm going to have to start writing down the books that I've already reviewed because, as my little brother says, I have the memory of an inchworm. So I definitely can't remember what books I've already reviewed. I hope I haven't reviewed this book yet. So this book is called Angel Dogs, Divine Messengers of Love. So I found this book actually in a thrift store, and again, if you saw one of my other videos on Saving Sadie, you'll know that I love dogs. I'm a huge animal lover. Overall, dogs are probably my favorite animal. That could change depending on my mood, but I love dogs. I have 2 dogs. I think that they're just amazing creatures, and I really do believe that they're like little angels on earth. And as much as it hurts when you lose one, it's definitely worth having another. So anyway, this is called Angel Dogs, and it is by Alan and Linda Anderson. They are also authors of God's Messengers and Angel Cats. So this book is pretty interesting. It's a little bit older, but it's filled with all these interesting experiences where, you know, coincidences, I don't know, sometimes it just seems like the universe lines up to try to tell you something. And I definitely think this is one of those books that shows dogs in the best light, to show how much they help us, how much they teach us, that they're there to provide us love and comfort and fun and distraction. And it's just a great little book. It's a whole bunch of short stories too, so that's also super nice, so you can like pick it up and put it down. None of them are too sad that I remember. I think there was 1 or 2 that kind of made me tear up because just the way the story was told. But overall, it's just a good little book. So anyway, Angel Dogs by Alan and Linda Anderson. So we are going to jump into our reading. We are continuing Touching the Void by Joe Simpson. And when we left off, we were on page 63, and they had just settled in for the night, and Joe was thinking back on how they almost fell. And he is retelling a story that Simon experienced, where Simon was climbing a mountain in France, and he watched 2 Japanese climbers fall to their deaths. So he's just kind of relaying that story for us. So again, we're going to pick back up at the bottom of page 63. Simon had struggled up to John's stance, which was out of sight of that lower section, and told him what had happened. They stood quietly on the small rock ledge in the gathering storm, trying to absorb the enormity of what had just taken place so close to them. There was nothing they could do for the 2 men who would never have survived the fall, and the quickest way to get news to the rescue services would be over the summit and down into Italy. As they resumed the climb, they were shocked to hear a ghastly screaming from far below, the chilling sounds of someone in agony, desperately alone and terrified. Looking down, they saw the 2 climbers sliding down the upper ice field at ever-increasing speeds 600 feet below them. They were still roped together, and various scattered items of gear and their rucksacks tumbled alongside them. All Simon could do was to stare helplessly at the 2 tiny figures racing down the ice. Then they were gone, disappearing over the lip of the ice field, falling out of view into the horrendous drop to the glacier. By some desperate quirk, at least one of the climbers must have survived the initial fall onto the ice field. Somehow they had been stopped, probably with their ropes snagged on some rocky projection, but they weren't saved. It was a cruel twist, both for the victims and for the horrified spectators far above them. Only a short reprieve, 5 minutes or so, while one of them fought to make himself safe and find some anchor. Badly injured, he had little chance. Perhaps he had slipped or the rope had unsnagged. Whatever had happened, the outcome was brutally final. Simon and John, their confidence shattered, minds numbed by it all, had turned and struggled on up to the summit. It had been so sudden. They hadn't conversed with the two Japanese, but a mutual understanding and respect had developed. If they had all got down safely, then they would have talked, shared food on the long walk to the valley, met up in a bar in town, perhaps become friends. I could remember seeing Simon walking slowly into the campsite outside Chamonk's when he got back. He was subdued and looked drawn and tired. He had sat numb, repeatedly questioning why his own tumble had been held on the same piton just before the Japanese leader had fallen and ripped it out. A day later, he was his normal self again and let me just start that sentence over. A day later, he was his normal self again, an experience absorbed, shelved in his memory, understood and accepted, and left at that. As sleep crept swiftly through me, I tried to shake off the thought of how close we had come to the same appalling end as those two Japanese. There would have been no one to watch us, I thought, as if it would have made any difference. So before I go to the next paragraph, I just want to share the picture it has here. It's the west face of the Sayula Grande in the Peruvian Andes. Oh, there's lots of pictures. Let me just show this one. So that's what they're climbing. Nuts. These people are nuts. And then we've got above and left, Joe and Richard walking into base camp. Left, Norma and Gloria visit the camp. And Quebrada Sempacha, where the girls tended their cattle. And this is another base camp. So, I'm not sure those are where you can see them very well, but just wanted to share if you're not reading along, if you don't have the book. But there are several pictures in here, just kind of showing, like this is a good one. This is showing Joe climbing up the ice field. So let me go back to page 64 in the next paragraph. I had the stove burning away cheerfully by my side and could look beyond it through a hole in the snow cave. The east face, I gotta flip through the pictures, of your Paja was framed perfectly in the circular window I had accidentally built into the cave. The early morning sun etched the ridge lines with shadows and danced blue shadings down the edges of the flutings on the face. For the first time in the last 4 days, the tense concentration in my body relaxed. The anxious struggles of the previous night had been forgotten, and the memory of how close we had come to falling to our deaths had faded. I gave myself time to enjoy where I was and to congratulate myself. I craved a cigarette. I was cramped in the snow hole, but infinitely warmer than in the previous one. Simon was still asleep, lying on his side close by me, facing away. His hips and shoulders pressed up against my side, and I could feel his body warmth seeping through my sleeping bag. The close intimacy seemed odd despite how together we had been on the mountain. I moved carefully to avoid waking him. I looked through the round hole window at the east face and felt myself smiling. I knew it would be a good day. The gas was all used up in the breakfast routine, and there would be no more water until we got down to the lakes below the moraines. I dressed and geared up first before climbing out of the cave and going over to the first cave I had attempted to dig. Simon was slow getting ready, and it wasn't until he joined me on the large platform in the collapsed cave that I remembered his frostbite. My good humor vanished to be replaced by worry when he showed his fingers to me. Sometimes I just end sentences. One fingertip was blackened and 3 other fingers were white and wooden in appearance. Funny how my anxiety seemed to have more to do with whether he would be able to carry on climbing after we got down, rather than concern for his injuries. I started up towards the crest of the ridge, which was bathed in sunshine, half a rope's length above me, while Simon remained below, guarding the ropes. We were both nervous about the possibility of another cornice collapse. When I reached the ridge, I was dismayed to see that there was a long section of tortured cornices and knife-edge powder to negotiate. My hope that we might have bypassed it all the day before evaporated. I shouted a warning down to Simon, and he agreed to follow me, moving together once all the rope had run out. Though we moved with exaggerated caution, we couldn't avoid slipping and falling, only half in control down the worst sections. I stayed close to the top of the ridge, which kept curling back on itself and dropping suddenly in short, steep walls. The possibility of a cornice collapse gradually faded from my mind as I moved, and I became resigned to the helplessness of our situation. The flutings lower down the east face would almost certainly be a worse proposition. As great a danger as the cornices was the risk of a fall. Any fall requiring a rope to stop it was going to be fatal. Neither of us would stand a chance. Yet every time I approached a steep section and was forced to back climb facing into the snow, I usually did so by a combination of falling and climbing. The powder was so insubstantial that, however hard I kicked my legs, I would whoosh down a few feet as soon as I got my weight off my arms. Each sudden heart-stopping slide seemed somehow to halt of its own accord. Where I would stop would be no more solid than where I'd fallen from. It wore one's nerves ragged. I slipped again, but this time yelped out in fright. The short, steep slope I was descending bottomed directly onto the edge of the ridge, which had curved back on itself. I had seen as I turned to face into the slope that a huge powdery cornice bulged out beneath this curve, and falling away below into the west face, plunged thousands of feet down to the glacier. Simon, moving a full rope's length behind me, was out of sight and would have no warning. No idea which side I was falling down. I rushed down in a flurry of powder so fast that my yelp came out as a squeak of alarm than an attempted warning cry. Simon didn't see the fall and heard nothing. Then, just as suddenly, I stopped, with my whole body pressed into the snow, head buried in it, with my arms and legs spread-eagled in a desperate, crabbed position. I dared not move. It seemed as if only luck was holding me onto the slope, and feeling the snow moving and sliding down past my stomach and thighs just made me cringe in deeper. I lifted my head and glanced sideways over my right shoulder. I was on the very edge of the ridge, exactly at the point of the curve. My body was tipped over to the right so that I seemed to be hanging out over the west face. All my thoughts became locked into not moving. I gasped fast breaths, scared sucks at the air, but I didn't move. When I looked again, I realized that I wasn't actually off balance, although the brief glance before had made me think I was. It was like discovering the trick behind an optical illusion, suddenly seeing what you had really been staring at all the time. The curve of the ridge away back to my left and the glimpse of the bulging cornice under its arc had confused me so much that I had thought I was leaning over the fall line. In fact, I found that my right leg had punctured straight through the cornice, and though my other leg had stopped me, it had also pushed me over sideways. This explained why I felt unbalanced, right side down. I scrabbled and clawed at the snow on my left, trying to pull my weight over to that side, trying to get my right leg back onto the ridge. Eventually, I succeeded and moved away from the edge, following the curve of the ridge again. Simon appeared above me, moving slowly, looking down at his feet all the time. I had moved to a safer place and shouted a warning for him to descend the slope further to the left and realized as I did so that I was shaking violently. My legs had gone to sudden jelly, quivering, and it took a long while for the reaction to fade. Long enough for me to watch Simon face into the slope and descend it in 2 footsteps and the inevitable rushing slide. When he turned and followed my steps, I could see the tension in his face. The day was neither enjoyable nor fun, nor funny. And when he reached me, the fear was infectious. We chattered out our alarm in quivery voices, quick staccato curses, and repeated phrases tumbling out before we calmed. Oh, this does not sound like a fun hobby to me. I'm just throwing that out there. These people are insane, but I do appreciate that they do this. Next time we'll talk a little bit about Mount Everest and just how it seems climbing works, because to me it's bizarre that if someone were needing help that you wouldn't like try to go help them. I guess we're just going to talk about it now because it's on my mind. But apparently the way I understand it is with this climbing stuff that you get in a position where if you try to help someone, then you're probably going to die too, is the way I understand it. But I don't, if you don't know this, but on Mount Everest, there are a lot of dead bodies up there because people will run out of oxygen, food, they'll get cold, they'll get hypothermia, they'll lay down, next thing you know, they're out, and then they're dead. So it just seems bizarre to me that I've read and watched different things where these climbers will see someone struggling, they're curled up, they're dying, and they just go past them. It's hard for me to imagine going past someone that needs help, or even that's dying. Even if you couldn't help them, if you could just be there for them in their last moments. But like I said, from what I understand, apparently it's just very dangerous. If you do try to stop and help someone, most likely you will die too, because you only have so much time to make it to the summit and get back down, or to the other side, or however your climb is. But yeah, if someone happens to be a climber and watches this channel, let me know the logic behind that. That's the way I understand it, but I could be wrong. I could be wrong. I was thinking that this video has ran long, so yes, it did. Anyway, I hope that you enjoyed today's read-along, and I hope you have a great day or week, depending on when you're watching this, and I hope to see you soon.